So now that we've got, those two things out of the way, what is Genius Yield?
Genius Yield, it's a startup that wants to build a yield optimizer eventually on Cardano. We start with a DEX because obviously in order to optimize yield, there must be yield in the first place. So we first want to need a DEX, and then on top of that, we will build this yield optimizer that can then optimize the yield. Of course, it wouldn't necessarily need to be our own DEX. We could also optimize yield on other people's DEXs, and we also plan to do that. So we want to partner with other DEXs because obviously that's a win-win for both parties. If we partner with a DEX, then we draw like activity to their DEX, so the more traffic for them. But also for us, it's good, obviously, because then there are more options for the yield optimizer to choose from. So the more DEXs and opportunities there are, the better, obviously, for investors. But nevertheless, we didn't want to completely rely on other DEXs. So we want to start with our own and then later extend the yield optimizer also to work with other DEXs as well. But start with our own.
Awesome. It may be too soon, but are there any other DEXs that you guys are interested in working with?
I'm always very bad with names. Obviously there's SundaeSwap. I think they want to launch tomorrow. They're
Yep,
first
excited
on
for that one.
So I don't know whether they want to work with us, but we have talked to a couple of other DEXs already, but I'm a bit hazy on the details because I try to like focus on writing the smart contracts and
That's fair.
leave these business arrangements to my colleagues.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I apologize for continue asking business oriented questions. I'm just trying to come from a viewer perspective and kind of get the viewer interest out of the way, and then we'll get to the more technical topics. But I really appreciate your response, and I also like that you guys aren't focusing on only looking to provide better yield on your own DEX, but also branching out to the wider community and thinking about using other DEXs as well. That's very exciting. So, what benefits are there to building a DEX and then also a yield optimizer on Cardano in Plutus versus building it on other chains, specifically Ethereum with Solidity?
Cardano. One of the things is that Cardano, because it's proof of stake, is orders of magnitudes cheaper to operate, which also reflects itself, one of the effects is that the transaction fees are much lower. And those are really a big obstacle to do something similar on Ethereum. So our Genius Yield artificial intelligence expert, Marvin, he has actually tried to joining Genius Yield, also tried to do something similar on Ethereum. And he says, in order to optimize this yield, you must move funds around fast. You have to quickly adjust. If there are price movements, then you have to reallocate funds from like one pool to another with a different price range and so on. And on Ethereum, that's really basically prohibitively expensive. So all the yield you could gain by shifting your liquidity is basically eaten up by the gas cost you have to pay to actually do this. So it's much easier to optimize yield and to quickly react to changes in the market on Cardano, where this is cheaper. So that's the one aspect, the lower fees. And then, of course, Cardano has a different model, the so-called EUTXO model, in contrast to the account-based model that Ethereum uses. So the whole blockchain works differently. So in that regard, Cardano is much more similar to Bitcoin than to Ethereum. And that has implications, for example, for security, that it's easier on Cardano to analyze the smart contract and to prove correctness. So, there are these infamous hacks on Ethereum, like the DAO hack, for example, and things like that are simply not possible on Cardano, or at least much more unlikely. Because it's much easier on Cardano to look at the contract and then really prove that it will not do certain things or will do certain other things. So in particular in finance or DeFi, where sometimes it's about millions or billions of dollars, of course that's important that you can have high assurance that your contracts will actually do what you hope they will do. That's another thing. And I also believe that due to this EUTXO model, there are some unique things you can do on regard to concurrency, for example, that are simply not possible on Ethereum. I mean, it's also challenging because you can't just take the proven like Uniswap contract and just one-to-one translate it to Cardano. You have to really solve the problems differently. If you just do it like that, then you would have massive problems with concurrency, for example.
Yeah.
But I think that is also, big opportunity to come up with solutions that are well suited to the model that Cardano uses, and then make full use of that and embrace them, this other model. So that's a third thing, I believe, makes it a good idea to build something like that on Cardano.
I really think that that's a huge perk, that you can't just, copy and paste, Uniswap and bring it over here, because what it's requiring, developers and, people that are building protocols to do is, as you said, learn about UTXO and learn, how should we build this? And I think that's like, although it's, a bit negative in turn, we don't have a DEX and we didn't have a DEX the same day Alonzo released. I think it's beneficial long term because it's really making people think about, how to build a DEX and not, going with the move fast and break things. You stated something in there specifically that, because of the hacks on Ethereum, that it just makes sense, because it, this is, oftentimes a financial instrument, that there is so much importance and security in making sure people don't lose their funds. And you stated that Cardano has a benefit, to essentially lower that risk. Can you expand on that a little further? How does Cardano lower the risk, either with Plutus or, UTXO, of people losing, their funds in these smart contracts?
Ethereum is extremely powerful, but part of the power comes from the fact, on Ethereum, everything is a smart contract and they can all talk to each other. So basically, in order to, a given smart contract on Ethereum can in principle call an arbitrary other contract on Ethereum while it's executing. But that also means in order to understand what can possibly happen with an Ethereum contract, in principle, you must take the whole Ethereum blockchain into account. You basically need the global view and must understand everything that's possible on Ethereum in order to completely understand what can potentially happen or what people can do. And so it's really powerful, but also a bit scary, and it's extremely difficult to prove or to think of all possible attacks or hacks. Cardano has this EUTXO model, and that works completely differently. And principle, all that this smart contract, Plutus smart contract on Cardano sees is the transaction that's just being validated. So everything is transactions, and the transaction can try to consume so-called script outputs that are locked by Plutus smart contracts. And then the so-called validators are run that are defined by these smart contracts. But the information that these scripts see is just the transaction that's currently being validated. So in order to analyze or to understand what can possibly happen, all you have to think about is this one transaction. So the rest of Cardano doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what other people concurrently at the same time do, what other contracts are out there. In order to fully understand what's going to happen, you only need to understand this one transaction, which of course makes it much more feasible to actually mathematically prove it, or to convince yourself or your clients that nothing bad will happen. That also has more practical implications. For example, one very, I found when I played with Ethereum, annoying thing is that on Ethereum it can happen you send a transaction to Ethereum and then it fails, so the smart contract fails, and you end up having to pay gas fees, but even though basically you didn't get the outcome you were hoping for. And on Cardano that's different because of this local nature that you only need to look at your own transaction. You know exactly what will happen or before you ever submit the transaction to the blockchain. So you already know it will validate. It can still happen when you then end up sending it to the blockchain that somebody else in the meantime has consumed one of the inputs you were expecting. So in that case, the transaction will not happen. But in contrast to Ethereum, you also won't end up having to pay fees for it. So it can still, you can't be sure that the transaction will actually end up in the block on the blockchain. But if it doesn't, you at least don't have to pay anything. But if it does, you know exactly what the effect will be, because that is only a local question that you could already decide before you ever send it. That's actually very nice. So you will never have this thing that you send something and then you have to pray that that you won't end up having to pay high gas fees for something that then eventually fails. So I think that's a very nice feature of Cardano.
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much for explaining that all for me.